Today I'm canning pickled beets, and this recipe is from Ball's Complete Book of Home Preserving. I'm using the sweet pickled beet variation. This variety is called Detroit dark red beets. You can start harvesting them when they're 1 inch in diameter, and you should not let them go beyond 3 inches in diameter because they can become fibrous and woody. To prepare the beets, I cut the tops off, leaving 1 inch or 2 of the stems. Now, all parts of beets are edible. You can eat the greens as well as the roots. But nobody around here is interested in eating the tops, so I threw them to the chickens. And as you can see, the chickens aren't interested in eating them either. So I washed the beets and I covered them with water and I boiled them until they were tender, which took about 20 minutes. Then I put the beets in a big bowl of cold water, cut off the tops and the bottoms, and then just rubbed off the peels. The peels come off very easily this way, and if they don't, then they weren't cooked long enough. Beets can stain your hands, so if you're concerned about that, then be sure to wear rubber gloves. Now for the pickle juice. I'm making a double batch, but for every 10 cups of beets, you would need to add 2.5 cups of white vinegar. However, I prefer apple cider vinegar. 1 cup of water, 1 cup of granulated sugar, 10 whole cloves, and 2 cinnamon sticks. Remember, I'm doubling this recipe. After boiling the pickle juice for 15 minutes, I added the beets to the pot and I brought it back to a boil. So now I'm ready to start canning. I take a hot jar and I fill it with the beets. And the goal here is to ultimately have a 1/2 inch headspace. So I keep filling the jar with beets and tamping it down with a bamboo skewer until I have a sufficient amount of beets in the jar. I add the liquid, leaving a 1/2 inch headspace. I get the air bubbles out using a non-metallic object. I wipe the rim of the jar clean. I take a hot lid and a hot ring. According to Ball, you no longer have to heat your lids or rings, but I don't mess with success, so I'll keep heating mine. I tighten the lid firmly. Then I set the jar back in the water bath canner to stay warm until I have all the jars full. Once all the jars were full, I lowered the rack into the water bath canner, making sure there was at least 1 inch of water covering the jars. I put the lid on, I brought the pot to a boil, and I processed the jars for 30 minutes. Pints and quarts get processed for the same amount of time, that is 30 minutes. If you live at high altitudes, you need to adjust the processing time to suit your altitude. When the time was up, I turned off the heat, I removed the lid, and I let the canner sit for at least 5 minutes. Then I removed the jars, placing them on the counter on a towel to cool. The next day, I removed the rings, I washed the jars, I wrote pickled beets on the top and the date that I canned them. This is how I canned pickled beets. If you wanted to can beets plain, that is to say without any vinegar in them, then they must be pressure canned. That's very important. Plain beets must be pressure canned. So that's how I canned pickled beets. I hope it helps.